Hello, this is Broadcasting 103. I'm Professor Tracy Savage, and this is my lecture video. Here's what's on tap for this week. By the end of this week, you'll have watched this lecture video. It deals with interviews, doing interviews, and preparing for interviews. You'll take a quiz on interviewing that focuses on the lecture material. You're going to read Chapter 5 from the textbook and submit 5 bullet points for Chapter 5. And then you'll be assigned your podcast number 2. You can record this live directly into the Canvas Dropbox and submit it that way. No need to record with your phone. I've posted instructions on how to do that at the top of a previous module. Go back and take a look. And finally, by the end of this week, you will watch an announcer profile presentation from one of your classmates. So here is what I'll be covering in this lecture video. We're going to be discussing interviewing, how to prepare and conduct a proper interview. And then I will assign you your next podcast number 2. We're going to start off this lecture video on interviewing by watching an interview on NBC's Today Show. I'm showing you this video not so much for you to analyze the host's interviewing techniques, but because of the interview subject. It's a great story.
First, the amazing turnaround for Ted Williams. As we said, we'll talk to him about his rough life, his golden moment, thanks to his golden voice in just a moment. But first, NBC's Kevin Tibbles has his story.
He was just another beggar by the highway, but his sign said, "I have a God-given gift of voice." So the reporter from the Columbus Dispatch took a chance.
Say something with that great radio voice.
When you're listening to nothing but the best of oldies, you're listening to Magic 98.9.
Within hours, that video went viral, way viral. Millions of hits on YouTube alone.
I shoot a lot of things, and nothing's quite stuck like this has.
His name is Ted Williams, 53, from Brooklyn. As a teen, he fell in love with broadcasting after a chance meeting with a local DJ.
He said to me, listen, radio is defined theater of mind.
But
Alcohol and drugs and a few other things became a part of my life.
he says he's clean now, but spent the last decade on the streets.
The Dave and Jimmy Show every weekday morning.
Perfect, man.
From the side of the road to inside the studios of local radio, where many callers offered Williams employment, even a mortgage.
I just didn't know if anything like this would have happened.
The NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers offered him a job.
We loved his voice, we loved his story, and our biggest priority right now is just to get him in here.
But before Ted Williams did anything else, he paid the Today Show a visit first thing this morning and helped get our day started in the voice booth. Now that's a set of pipes. For today, Kevin Tibbles, NBC News.
Live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
Ted Williams, good morning, sir. How are you?
Sir.
It's great to have you.
It's great to be here. This is a dream come true, I'm telling you. Honestly.
It's that second chance.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you begin to even sum up what these last 48 hours or so have been like in your life?
Outrageous. It's just phenomenal. I mean, there's no way in the world that I could have ever imagined, Matt, that I would be. I mean, just have all of this, just all of a sudden, just come into, this portion of my life.
You were panhandling 2 days ago, 3 days ago.
Yes.
On the streets of Columbus, Ohio.
Yes.
You're in New York City now, and you're on national television.
Isn't that something? I mean, I'm telling you.
It's got to be a little
it's
overwhelming, to process it even.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And you almost didn't make it here, right? You have problems at the airport.
Somehow the flight got delayed and everything, and then, God.
But didn't you need papers to even prove who
Yeah,
you were?
I had to get an ID. Oh,
Right.
okay, the ID situation. Yes, ma'am. We had to go all the way downtown and get a proof of residency. I had to go to a couple homeless shelters to get that filled out. And then I had to get a court injunction to, prove who I was, date of birth and all, because I didn't have any ID or nothing.
We mentioned New York's your home, right?
Yes, Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York.
Yes,
your
right in the
mom's...
Bedford-Stuyvesant area. I was born and raised.
How long has it been since you've been here and been in contact with some family members?
1986 was the last time I actually set foot right here. I watched a ball come down. I took the mother of my two boys, and we came in, and this was the first time she had ever been here, and I was doing fairly well then. I was working in radio and all, but she never been here.
So what happened, Ted? Help us understand what happened. Okay. You say in '86 you were doing well. You're working in radio.
And in 1993, Miss Meredith.
That's okay.
Drugs and alcohol. I started snorting cocaine, and then I started smoking it, the crack and all of that, and then drinking. Alcohol has always been a part of my life because my parents used to travel down to St. Thomas, so I did have an alcohol problem at an early, but I was a functional alcoholic at that point, I thought, you know. But
how bad did it get?
Yeah.
Pretty bad. I was drinking like a fifth a day, but I was working. I was doing well. I was really doing well. At least I thought, you know. But
was it the drugs then that took you down?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
When did you lose your home? I mean, when did you
end up? In '93. That's when the pits. You know, my life just went to the pits. I was at the homeless shelters in Columbus, and then I was I was introduced to the program of recovery.
I noticed something in that video that we've all now seen so many times that was on the internet, and when the reporter for the Columbus Dispatch comes up to you and he starts asking you about your voice, despite your hard times, there is this civility to you, Ted. There is this kindness. There is this grace about you. Thank you, sir. God bless you. Where does that come from?
My mom has raised me that way, to always be polite. Treat people as you would want them to treat you, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And that's the golden rule, as she always put it.
And you've mentioned your mom repeatedly in the past couple days.
I love my mom, and I here comes maybe some tears, but how I always used to pray to God. I'm telling you, religiously, say, Lord, please let my mom live to see another year. Maybe this will be a year that somebody would say, hey man, do you want a job or anything? But and I always used to say, God, you've never seen fit to take my voice, in spite of all the flames and everything that went down my throat. The voice still maintained some type of resonance. And so when I got out there with the sign, it gave me a chance to, the public passing, good morning, thank you, and people would roll their windows down. Then it became a situation where the same people that would give me money, they would just come by just to see if I was still there so that they could hear me say, listen to more of the best music. And I started using local talents.
So your mom has lived long enough to see what is going to be, we hope, redemption. Yes. And I hope you understand what I say. Meredith and I were talking before the show, and we both worry a little that a lot is happening very quickly.
Yes.
And some people might find that hard to deal with. And so are you emotionally ready to accept this second chance, to do the right things with this second chance?
This time around, Matt, I have a God. A God of my understanding in my life, and acknowledging him on the daily basis, which I've been doing this past year, because I was ready to mark 2010 as another year wasted, until I realized that in 2010 I found a new sense of spirituality. Now, I'm not saying I've become this born again type person to where I'm going around, but I do want to say that the difference between my successes of years gone by, I didn't acknowledge the Lord or thank him for anything before, and I've had some great opportunities of emceeing various venues and having a great time with all the perks that radio had, but I never not once said, oh Lord, thank you for this, or thank you for another day, or forgive me for this or that. But this time around, I'm acknowledging him in all my ways.
So you think you can make it?
Yes, sir.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about reports that beyond the drugs and the alcohol, there were run-ins with the law.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? We heard about robbery and forgery.
Yes. Well, the robberies and all have been broken down and anything. I've never stuck any, no violent crimes at all. It was all thefts and fraud type things, and that was just to afford the drug habits and so forth. But I ended up... the judges have been lenient, because it was like, okay, let's do this to him. And, I never got anything of any serious time or anything, but I did go behind, fences with barbed wire and so forth.
Have you had a chance, Ted, to stop and think about some of what's being offered to you right now? I mean, people want you to do voiceovers for them. The Cleveland Cavaliers have offered you a job.
Look at this one.
NFL Films interested in talking to you.
They need some help right now. So.
They said that they're going to give me LeBron's old house. I
You're
didn't
really
know.
working it.
How about
No,
baby
I'm
steps,
just
Ted?
Yes, sir.
Baby
Yes,
steps.
sir. No.
But
bring
have
the
you had a
limo
chance
over.
to even think about what you would like
they've
to
been
do?
coming in so fast, but I do want to say that I did have one offer here in New York. The fine people at Kraft Macaroni and Cheese have offered me to be the official voice of their product. So when I leave here today, I'll be doing some voiceers for the fine people of Kraft.
How would you pitch their product?
When you're looking for a cheesy product, a very delicious macaroni and cheese, choose Kraft. That kind of thing. But I do just want to say one more thing. That this is, man, meeting you two guys and the lovely Ann Curry and Al Roker and all that, man, I'm telling you, I watched the Today Show religiously ever since I was a kid, from Gene Shalit and Bryant Gumbel and Jane Pauley and all of that. And you guys have replaced those people the best.
Let me
I
thank you
do
for
want to
that.
say that.
Thank you, Ted.
I'm glad I got that opportunity to get that out of me, because
Let me end with one question.
Yes, sir.
If we sit down with you, Ted, 5 years from today, what are you going to be doing?
Yeah.
hopefully a program director somewhere, or I'll have my own apartment. I will say that, and you know, my kids will have love for me. I'll say, hey, Meredith and Matt, the kids are over here and this, that, and the other. I do want to say hello to my children in Columbus.
How many kids?
I have 7 girls and 2 boys.
7 girls and 2 boys. Wow.
Yes. And they're all adults. And I have grandchildren. And I want to say hi to, can I say hello to some people?
Sure, go.
Mark Henderson, who was very instrumental in helping me with a place to live. And I want to say hi to Jimmy Cottrell, my girlfriend Katie, and my children Julie, Janae, Trisha, Tangela, and Keisha, and my son Desmond and Tyrell, and my mom, wherever she's at. I miss her so much. I just want.
I'm sure you'll get to see her.
Yes, ma'am.
You also have a greater appreciation for the homeless as well. If
Oh,
there's anything
truly,
we need
truly.
to understand,
Please.
what would we?
Please don't judge a book by its cover. Everybody has their own little story, and the next time, if you're going to give to any homeless person, give from the heart, and not give and then say, oh, I know they're not going to do nothing but use it for drugs and alcohol, because that's not always the case. And I want to say hi to Al Battle, who's handling, that gentleman standing right behind camera. He's the one that's handling all of the fielding all of the calls that's coming in, because like you said, Matt, they're coming in by the dozens, and I don't know which one to choose and which one's a right one, which one's bogus or anything. I'm just thankful to be here, and I'm taking it one step at a time.
Well, you should.
And it's the Today Show. I just got to take advantage of all of this.
Thanks, Ted, so much.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
God
all
bless
right,
both
congratulations.
of you. Meredith,
See you in
thank
5 years, right?
Yes,
When you're
ma'am.
the program director.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're working for you.
No, God. Thank
Remember
you.
us.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Yes, I will.
Just say, let's get a check of the weather from Al now. Go ahead.
And now it's time to get a check at the weather with Al.
Interviews can be very interesting and fun. They look easy, but actually require a lot of preparation. The best broadcast interviews are conducted like well-planned conversations and can range from a very short soundbite, which is a television term, to a 60-minute or longer talk show. Good interviewing is a combination of practice and preparation. There are many kinds of interviews, but the 2 basic types are news and feature interviews. So news interviews are specifically designed to gather information about a news event, a person in the news, or a current issue. They tend to be shorter than feature interviews, but not always. For example, interviews on the television program like Meet the Press may last up to a half hour. Feature interviews are designed to entertain or provide in-depth information about an interesting person or issue. Feature interviews often focus on certain people because of who they are, like celebrities, what they do, maybe an interesting or unusual occupation, or what they've accomplished, maybe a 90-year-old man who parachutes out of a plane to celebrate his birthday. Broadcast interviews tend to fall into 2 categories: those that will be longer and will air more or less complete, to those from which brief segments will be edited. For the longer or whole program interview, the opening is particularly important. However, in a short segment, an introduction is not always necessary, as the news anchor or reporter will begin it with a lead-in to give the audience some orientation to what they will hear or see. Frequently, the interview portion is just one part of a longer report. Although it will vary a little depending on the nature of the produced opening, you're going to want to follow a general 5-step pattern for your interview: the opening, an introduction, the questions and discussion, a reintroduction, and a close. The introduction is the time when you establish yourself and the reason for the interview. The interview normally begins with a brief statement that includes the name of the show, the name of the host, the name of the guest, and the interview topic. Even if much of this is covered in the produced opening, you'll still greet your audience and re-identify yourself, perhaps slipping in the name of the program as well. For example, the teacher's strike is on. Today, teachers hit the picket lines. Good evening. I'm Tracy Savage, and welcome to the Conversation Corner. But most importantly, you're going to want your audience to want to keep listening, so it's important to capture their attention in the very beginning.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. What a beautiful day it is, and I'm so happy to be sharing it with all of you. When it comes to opening a presentation, what I've just said is completely acceptable, extremely polite, and totally predictable. That's right. The typical opening remarks that most speakers make are benign and boring. They signal to the audience that what they are about to hear is nothing new or innovative or even interesting. Because even if you're getting ready to share the most incredible news in modern medicine, you have already lulled your audience into complacency. So, what separates the powerful, passionate introductions from those that are merely polite? It's about capturing your audience's attention the moment you begin to speak, and then keeping their attention throughout. Along with getting attention, a good opening also establishes your believability and credibility. Within the first minute of your presentation, you need to establish why you are the person to be delivering this message to this audience at this time. Of course, if you have someone to introduce you to your audience before you begin to speak, you can have that person highlight your personal and professional credentials. But if it's left up to you, you might need to list a few carefully selected highlights which can be expressed directly, such as in this example. I have a nursing degree from the University of Michigan, and I've spent the past 7 years working in the critical care unit of New York's Lenox Hill Hospital. You can also share your credentials indirectly through storytelling, such as in this example. Over the past 7 years in my role as a critical care nurse at New York's Lenox Hill Hospital, I have seen my share of trials and tribulations. But whether you take a head-on approach or a more roundabout way, you'll need to let your audience know the answer to why you. In addition to gaining attention and establishing credibility, your opening also needs to speak to the audience's WIFM. What'em? WIFM. W-I-I-F-M. This stands for What's in It for Me. Whether we like to admit it or not, we're all self-interested as listeners. We pay attention to those things that feel personally and professionally relevant, useful, and pressing, and ignore the rest. So a good opening establishes early on what about today's presentation is going to be relevant, useful, and pressing to this audience. If the audience isn't compelled to care, they're going to be looking for their first opportunity to tune you out. And it's your job to get them interested and invested. When making an introduction, you'll want to consider how much time you have. A good guideline is that your introduction should take up about 2 to 3 minutes of the presentation time, especially if you have a significant amount of content to follow. The relationship that you and your audience may or may not have at the start is also a factor for consideration. A smart way to get started is to poll the room, asking how many people are NPs, LPNs, social workers, or other allied professionals. You might then ask, who else is in the room with professions you haven't mentioned, and be welcoming of them as well. By knowing who is in the room, you can ensure that your examples and information are aimed at your audience and their clinical expertise. You also want to think about your audience's relationship to your topic, not just to you. If your listeners are already positively inclined to act on your message, then your introduction can take that into account. If you have a mixed opinion audience or a resistant audience, you may want to address this up front, such as, I know that today's topic may bring up a number of questions from you, and I want to let you know that I will address as many as I can in the time that we have today. That puts the audience at ease, and when the audience is relaxed, you can relax too. Finally, you'll want to consider your natural style when planning an introduction. Here are some possible ways to start your presentation off on the right foot, no matter what the topic is. Ask a question, either one that calls for a response or a rhetorical one. Asking the audience a question forces them to start thinking. It's creating an opening that they want and need to fill. Use today's date. If you happen to be speaking on the anniversary of 9/11, you need to acknowledge it. If you happen to be speaking on the day before everyone is leaving for Thanksgiving vacation, you need to acknowledge it. When there's something generally known about today's date, your introduction provides an appropriate opportunity for you to address something that you and your audience share, which is exactly how you can build rapport. Well, I can tell you that setting high expectations at the beginning of your presentation is the key to establishing rapport, connection, and credibility with your audience. And once you get them rooting for you, the rest of your presentation will go a lot more smoothly. Of course, all good things must come to an end, and your conclusion is where you make sure that you have left your audience feeling positive and with a clear call to action. A great conclusion recaps the main points of your presentation, brings the topic to a natural, satisfying close, includes a call to action when appropriate, and lets the audience know once and for all that you and they are done. Too often, we put plenty of time and thought into our introductions and the body of our presentations, but we don't plan for our wrap-up. Sometimes we run out of time or energy in the planning phase, and this bleeds into the presentation, where we simply run out of time or energy in the delivery. Isn't it a shame to have put so much work into your presentation only to leave the audience remembering your fizzle out at the end? That's a rhetorical question, by the way, a technique you can use not only in the opening, but in the closing as well. Your audience may likely remember best what you said last. Do you want them to remember you saying, I guess that's it? Do you want them to remember you coming to your conclusion and then discovering you had a few more points to make on previous slides? I bet not. As a polished presenter, you want your audience to remember you being in control of yourself, your content, and your time to the very end. You also want your audience to remember what you said and what you want them to do without any confusion or delay. Make sure that you present your final slides with power, polish, and professionalism, and with a positive tone to leave your audience feeling positive about you and your message.
If the interview is topic-oriented, not person-oriented, you'll want to make a statement about the subject to be discussed so that the audience understands what you're going to be covering and why. If you have a good answer for the question, why this interview, you're well on your way toward a good one. Try to avoid just stating, my guest today is. Here's a simple example. Jumping out of an airplane with only a few pounds of fabric keeping you alive is not something that appeals to a lot of people. However, my guest today loves the experience and has just completed his 100th jump, and he's 75 years old. I'd like you to meet fill in the blank. That short statement attracts some attention, establishes what you're going to be talking about, and should intrigue much of your audience into staying with you for a while. Not all openings can be that brief and that interesting, but it's a place to start. When introducing your guest, be sure to get the name and the title of their job correct. The introduction should be used to establish the person's credentials, sometimes called the qualification. In other words, tell the audience why the guest is qualified to speak on the topic. Here's an example of qualifying introduction. The Declaration of Independence is over 225 years old. The Bible and the Quran are much older than that. We know that documents written hundreds of years ago still exist. Did you ever wonder how that happens? Our guest today is Dr. Elbert Jones of State University, who's an authority on old documents and quite a collector of them as well. We're going to explore how you find old documents, how you preserve them, and what kind of costs are involved. The topic may not be as exciting as jumping out of a plane, but it shows how a guest might be qualified. Next, you welcome your guest. This helps to establish a friendly atmosphere and to develop a rapport, but avoid trite remarks like, "Thanks for finding time in your busy schedule." The basic guideline is to address the guest as the average listener or viewer would. The third step is the interview itself. At the beginning of your career, you probably will be asked to interview many local people on many topics. Often the best part of the interview occurs when the person has talked for a while, has developed a level of trust with the interviewer, and has relaxed. This is when an effective interviewer can use his or her skill and knowledge to create a successful interview, and then go for the kill. Okay, maybe not, but that's when you would start asking the tough questions. In any communications setting, trust is important for a relaxed and interesting conversation, and the same is true for interviewing. Trust is developed through the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee. As you may have not met many of the people you interview before and will likely not see them again, trust can be best established by treating guests with dignity and respect. Trust begins with the first encounter. The tone of voice, facial expression, and body language all contribute to its development. Trust is not developed by letting the guests control the interview or letting them have prior approval of questions. If you plan to have a long career in the field, you must develop the ability to establish trust. And remember that once trust is lost, it's not easily regained. The fourth part of an effective interview is reestablishing the credentials of the guest. Unless the interview is shorter than 5 minutes, you should reintroduce the guest and the topic near the midpoint of the interview. So on television, a graphic can be used that keys the name or the topic on the screen without disrupting the flow of the interview. On radio, though, you need to pause between questions and give the reintroduction. You might go something like this. And we are talking today with John Smith about jumping out of planes. In either situation, a good time to reintroduce guests is after a commercial break because it provides a natural interruption in the program. The final part of the interview is the close. In most cases, a brief thank you to the guest and a mention of the guest's name and topic one more time are sufficient. Try to avoid cliched endings such as, "I see our time is up," or "We hope you enjoyed the show." These two have become trite, overworked expressions. A way to set the tone for the close is to ask the guest whether there's anything else they'd like to add. If they have felt that you ignored a point that's really important, this provides an opportunity for them to respond and helps to maintain rapport with them for the future. Often, the close is a good opportunity to promote the next interview. If you know who the guest will be, and if the program is aired on a regular schedule. As with the introduction of the interview, it's good practice to write down the closing comments so you can finish smoothly. An additional step may be needed for television interviews. If your interview was done outside of the studio and the final product will be edited later, then you need to include cutaway shots. These are close-ups of you and the guest responding to each other. It's sometimes done without a guest. Just make sure you look natural and appear interested and pensive. Cutaways need to match in terms of lighting, clothing, hairstyle, and makeup. That's why they're best done immediately after an interview. Be sure to focus your eyes where the guest would be in making the shot. You also should avoid responding with or okay, because they often overlap with the speaker and are difficult to edit out.
Interviewing is an art, but I don't treat it that way. So let's put it like this. This is basically a talk about not talking. I work at a very eclectic community radio station, and we're really lucky. We talk to all kinds of people. Yeah, there's bands that come through. That's great. I can hang with that. But authors, read a fucking book. We've got authors coming through. We've got poets and drug addicts and nonprofits of every stripe and scientists, like people with job titles like fluvial geomorphologist, right? I don't know either. But the thing is, I have to have this conversation with them, and I want it to be good and meaningful. I really do, and I want to know what makes them tick. The problem is I'm not an expert in fluvial geomorphology, and the truth is in this life you get to be an expert in like 1, maybe 2 things, max, okay? So how do you get through this? What I want to talk to you today about is how to fake your way through an interview and hopefully have a great conversation on the other side of it, okay? Now, I did get some on-the-job training. It was very sparse, and the woman who was training me, she's sort of walking me through the building. I was going to be on the air in a week, and she's like, here's how you do this, here's how you do this. Oh, and you're going to be interviewing people. And I'm like, oh, okay. I get a pen out, right? She's like, here's how you do that. You just shut up. And I put the pen away. She's like, you just shut up. You got that? I got that. And that was 15 years ago. I still got that. It's fantastic advice, and there's a couple other tricks that I want to share with you. There's about 6 little ones and then 1 massive one, so let's do this. Here's how you interview almost anyone. Trick number 1, do some prep. Come on. Don't be that guy who is like, I'm just going to wing it, man. And I'm looking at podcasters mostly for this. There's this scourge of people who think that they can sit down and hold their own, and they can't. Nobody is that good. Nobody is that good, okay? And secondly, it's a little arrogant and vain to think that you are, so show your guest, it's true, show your guest the basic dignity of a Google search. It's not hard. Do it on your phone. I don't care when you do it, just do it. Okay, so number 2, you are going to be doing some prep. I suggest, since that author is coming in and you may not have read the whole book, or like maybe even half of it, they're going to need you to know about it. So what you do is you find interviews they already did, and somebody else can do the work for you. Now, I'm not saying steal their questions, because that's wrong, but I am saying you can use the answers that they gave earlier as your jumping off point. Okay, we call this the Terry Gross move. You guys know who Terry Gross is? Okay, she's fantastic. And she said this was a stealable move. I was in the room. She said you can have it, okay? So what that looks like when you're basically following up on somebody else's question. So if that person is on NPR, and that person says, well, my workflow goes like this. I wake up at 7:05, then I do hot yoga, then I'm in the office by 9. You can use that answer and you can pick it apart, and you can say, 7:05? It's like, a normal person sets an alarm for 7:05. It's 7 o'clock, 7:30. Why that? And then they will tell you, well, I did the math. This is how long it takes me to get to the bathroom, and then the shower takes this long, and then you're off to the races, okay? So 7:05, that's the Terry Gross move. Follow up. All right. Now, if you're going to be finding interviews with people, this is my personal favorite, and I hope that you remember this and steal it. You can have it. It goes like this. Find verbal interviews. When you read in Rolling Stone or some blog an interview, the odds are very high that that interview was done over email. So they're thinking their answers out. It's all calculated. It's tactical. You don't want that. You want the verbal things, where you get the social cues and the intangibles that they're going to bring to you, like a normal human in a normal human conversation, where you know if they're nervous and you can help them. If you know that they're going to be nervous, you can see it and you can predict it, okay? So another thing they'll telegraph to you in these other interviews that you're listening to, do they speak too fast? Are they walled off? Do they have a stutter, a lisp? Like, you want to know all this going in. So find verbal interviews. Now the sidebar to that, this is a great thing. As an interviewer, you really, really want to hear these words. How did you even know that? That's what you want to hear. And if you can find these sort of small-time interviews, these verbal interviews that they've done, right? If you're going on NBC in the morning, you were going to stay up all night practicing. But if you were going on a high school radio station in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, you were going to phone it in from your car on your way to pick up your kids, right? You're going to forget everything you said on that interview. So those are the ones you want to find, the little tiny ones where the stakes are very low and they're very casual. Because all these tips that I'm trying to give you set a stage for a person to be casual, comfortable, and human. So find the little ones, because when you bring up the thing that they forgot they told the high school DJ in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, they will tell you, how did you even know that? And then they loosen up even more because things are going good. First 3 tips, that's all beforehand. Second 3 tips are going to be during the interview. Number 1, I hate to even say it, but icebreakers, they totally work. Your summer camp counselor was right, okay? And the trick that you want to do is when you are breaking the ice with somebody you don't know, especially when they're way out of your league, is make it relevant, camouflage it. So if you're talking to a fluvial geomorphologist, and I have, she was awesome, it's great. You can ask things like, what was your major in college? It's relevant, but not really. It's an icebreaker. And then I go, oh yeah, you know, I went into college as a poetry major, but then I switched to geology. What? Like, how do you connect that? And you ask her that, and she will connect poetry to geology, and it's beautiful, okay? So don't fear the icebreaker. It'll work for you. Last 2 little things before we get to the big one. Number 1 is listen, which is harder and harder and harder. Everything in this world is trying to shorten your attention span, and everything is winning at that. Everything is winning. And if you're not listening to me right now, I feel you. But try to focus in, and don't do these corny things of like trying to think of your next question while they're still talking. Listen completely and be there, be present. Don't try to get a joke in, and certainly do not step on their answer. Give them the time, okay? So you want to listen, and you can only listen if you, last one, shut up. She was right. It comes back to shutting up and giving them some breathing room so that they can say their piece at a tempo they're cool with. And there's a fun sidebar to the shut up thing, which is this. Dead air chicken. Does that make sense just right off the bat? No? Okay, so dead air chicken works like this. It can go on. And I will win. Because when you create an awkward pause that is awkward enough, the thing that they will desperately fill it with burbles up from a wild part of their psychology that they cannot control at all. And this is where you get your unpredictable stuff. So dead air chicken, do proceed with caution though. All right. So now these things will get you through an interview. They will get you through to the other side, and you will kind of appear competent, because you kind of are at this point, but it won't give you the conversation that you want to have, the one that people will email you later about and say, man, I didn't think fluvial, what is it? I didn't know that was my thing. So they will email you this if you can set the table for your guest to be comfortable. You know when you're at a party, and you are explaining your job to somebody else, or your passion to somebody else, and they're just leaning in, and they're like, bring it, I want to know everything you can tell me. That is the real trick. Bored people are boring. Interested people are interesting. So what I'm trying to tell you is be interested in everything possible, right? Everything at all. Curiosity is a muscle. And I'm not the most curious person by any stretch, but I have found that the ROI on curiosity, man, that pays for itself. Because if you can put yourself in uncomfortable positions, if you can, like for me it looks like, sort of cultivating curiosity. I try to diversify my media. I try to listen to genres of music I don't like. Free jazz. What the hell, free jazz? I want to know what people see in free jazz. I don't get it, but I listen to it sometimes, and it's sort of rewarding. But it gives me practice at being uncomfortable with things I don't know about. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that if you can be interested in everything as much as possible, it makes your life better. Not just when you're at work having to interview fluvial geomorphologists, right? Because you will find that you can hang with most conversations because you are bought in, you are genuinely interested in what you are being told. You are learning. And there's an Emerson quote. He says, "Every man I meet is my superior in some way. And in that I learn from him." And that is, in my experience, completely true. I think about it a lot. And I have talked to Oscar winners. I have talked to hobos who live in a bush. And they're equally interesting to me Their narrative matters. And if I can sort of set the table for them to tell me how they are the good guy in their own movie, that's all I want, and that's all they want. And time after time, if you can get to that point in your discussions, in your interviews, you will find that you walk away a better person. So, to conclude, do the tips, do some prep, seriously, do that. Use the icebreaker, find the verbal interviews, do all that stuff. But if you can make curiosity your hobby, if you can become an expert in curiosity, if that's your one area of expertise, you will find that every single person is worth listening to, and you're going to walk away better. And don't forget to shut up.
In a radio studio, the guest and host will probably face each other while sitting at a table or a counter, and you will speak into separate microphones that are usually on mic stands or a boom in front of each other. To make sure that the guest is comfortable, take a few moments to talk casually before beginning the interview. Ask about the weather, the guest's trip to the studio, or some other insignificant topic. These can all help settle the person down if he or she is nervous. An audio engineer or the host announcer, who may be operating the equipment, will ask for sound levels. Each person who talks on the program will have to speak so that the volume can be adjusted for correct technical sound. Encourage your guests to speak in their normal voice. The usual television interview set consists of chairs or a desk with chairs on either side. The host is usually on the right. In television, the right side of the screen is considered dominant, and if the host is put there, he or she becomes as important as the guest. Both Oprah Winfrey and David Letterman used to use this configuration, and most of the nighttime talk show hosts do it as well. Because the comments they interject during the interview are as important to the program as whatever the guest says. But sometimes, if the guests are put on the right side of the screen, and then he or she becomes dominant. Larry King used this approach back when he was doing a national TV show because the emphasis of his program is more on the guest and the topic. Both guest and host in a television interview usually wear small, inconspicuous microphones that the floor director or other crew members will help attach properly. Although interviews often seem spontaneous and unrehearsed, they require time and effort in preparation. Prior experience and knowledge in any area certainly help, but thorough research about your topic is essential for an effective interview. It helps develop the focus of your story and defines what you want the audience to understand or know. Finding interesting guests can also be a challenge. Not everyone makes a good interview subject. Choose an interview topic or person that you and your audience would find interesting. In order to do that, you will need to know something about your audience. Begin by researching the topic and the person. Start with what you find interesting and investigate what you don't understand. Chances are that if you don't understand something, your audience won't either. When researching, a useful technique is to write down interesting statements or quotes from what you read. These may not be used verbatim during the interview, but may remind you or the interviewee of some interesting aspect of his or her life. Ask for a copy of the person's resume if he or she is a professional. Be curious and be current. The audience wants to listen to new ideas and stories or issues to which they can relate. Another area to consider when planning an interview is time. For the beginner, the judgment of time is difficult. You need to plan to have more than enough material to fill the entire time period. Experience will be your biggest aid, but some over-preparation will help you survive until that sense of time develops. Even then, it's usually easier to shorten a discussion than it is to expand one when you don't have enough material. What about questions in advance? Do you allow your interviewee to read them? No way. You may get requests for the actual questions. It's not a good idea to let them read them, as it'll take away from the spontaneity of the interview and produce a feeling, well, that you get kind of a rehearsed response. The guest should have a general idea of the ideas you will discuss so that they can be prepared. And if you've done a pre-interview, they probably can guess several questions you're going to ask. Another form of the interview that can be quite different from the longer studio interview is the news interview out in the field. These are almost always shorter and are aimed at getting one or more statements that can be included in news reports or some incident or event. Here, the interviewer is not as interested in the overall discussion as in a clear statement of what the interview saw, heard, or experienced. As a result, there is less preliminary discussion, so that the whole interview may last less than 5 minutes and the desired segment will simply be lifted out. That's called a soundbite. Much of what you will ask will be devoted to getting the information for your report while encouraging the subject to make the focus statement or soundbite. In this situation, you'll need to get the person talking and guide them with questions, even if you have to butt in occasionally. It may take questions like, how did you know the person? When did you notice the fire? Describe what you heard or saw. You might even use, how did you feel about that attack on the elderly person? Good interviewing takes practice. Listening is really important. Asking questions and planning the interview, especially the opening and closing, are critical. They're key skills that a good interviewer will need to develop. Listening is an active process and requires energy and commitment. Active listening in an interview is both mental and physical and involves paraphrasing to be sure you and your audience comprehends. Asking questions and expressing understanding of the speaker's ideas or feelings, listening requires concentration, but it can be learned. So what do you listen for? Well, listen for words the audience may not understand. This could include abstract or vague ideas, as in, the mayor faces a number of problems. Well, what does that mean? What problems? Second, listen for words that may be unique to the field or subject being discussed, and ask for an explanation of terms. Use of jargon may appear to give a sense of credibility, but if the audience doesn't understand what is said, it's not a good interview. For example, if your guest blurts out, "That wig picker, Christine Martin, summed it up nicely when she said," so it'd be helpful for the audience if they knew what a wig picker is. It's actually slang for a psychologist, not a hairdresser. So third, listen for cues. The guest may make a statement that could lead to interesting new areas of questioning. In particular, look for opportunities to follow up questions that continue a line of thought from the previous question or a shift to a new aspect of the topic. Reacting to answers shows that you're listening. However, avoid responding with comments like yes or no or uh-huh or okay. First, it sounds unprofessional and is a poor performance practice, as we've already noted. Second, it may give the impression to the audience that you agree with the person when perhaps you do not. Third, if the interview is to be edited, it can make the job more difficult because you're often not on camera and a voice that apparently comes from nowhere can be distracting. The best type of listening reaction is nonverbal. That includes smiling, head nodding, and direct eye contact. The interviewee still needs to feel he or she is being heard, even if you're not verbally responding. However, do not fake attention. Appearing to listen is not the same as listening. For the beginner, it's very easy to get so involved with what you're going to ask that you focus on your notes and not the guest. Not only is this rude, but you may easily miss a key comment that could be very significant to your audience.
What should we talk about? I don't even know. Should we talk about anything here? I don't know. Who is?
It's your interview. I don't know. What do you want to do?
Is this a good way to start an interview, Drew?
No, this is wretched. This is how not to start an interview. This is, if you're going to do an interview, you've got to be prepared. You got to know what you want to accomplish. And I'm not certain, David, you know what you want to accomplish.
I think I know what I want to accomplish. I want to accomplish how to do this better. If I were to start an interview, what do I need to prepare before this interview even begins?
Oh, you have to remember as a storyteller that the interview is the spine of your story. It's the heart and soul. What other body parts can I pick? It is the part of your story that's going to give it emotion and focus, and it's how your audience is going to engage in your story. And that's what you're looking for, is engagement. You're looking for an audience to go, that's like me. I have that pain point. I have that problem. This person maybe can help me out. So as a consequence, as a producer, as a reporter, as a journalist, you need to make certain that you're driving that interview in ways that make the person comfortable, but also so that you're controlling it, giving it boundaries. And there are a couple of ways I like to think about it. One is you need to not only think about yourself doing an interview as a journalist, but you need to kind of think of yourself as a shrink, because you're really reading body language, where they're excited, what they're interested in, what their point of view is. All of those sorts of things are really important so that you're going to be in a position to respond and get the answers you need, because you're really looking for, you're talking to somebody because they've got a point of view or they got a piece of information you need. And
well, let me cut you off right there. The respond is key. And I think that's super important, because we do go in with a list of prepared questions, but don't let that be a military list, because the response is critical. And talk about like reading the person and responding as a result.
I have a technique when I'm going to do an interview, and I know it's going to be a little more complicated, not something that's necessarily at an event, but where I'm going to go talk to a business executive or somebody in my company or organization where it's like a CEO, and I need to prepare a little bit. So what I do is I work really hard on my questions, and I really craft them. I get them in an order I want. I really work on them, and just before the camera rolls, I look at those interviews and really quickly, and then I sit on them. Because I don't want the person I'm interviewing looking at the top of my head. Because as they talk, if I'm doing this, they don't know who they're going to talk to. They're not talking to me. I need to make certain, if I'm running that interview, that I'm controlling that interview and I'm listening. And I'm not only listening with my ears, I'm listening with my eyes. What are they responding to? If I know my questions, I can do a pivot. I can respond to what they're interested in. I know that, okay, maybe question 2 was this, but they just touched on something that's in question 4, and I'm going to follow that up. And if I'm worried about my next question, I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss an opportunity to really engage this person and give them a chance to go. So to prepare for an interview, that means I'm really looking at it in 3 sections. The first section is the research phase, where I look at who I might want to interview, and I almost cast it like a movie. Do they know their stuff? Are they passionate about what they care about? Is it someone who has a good story to tell? Do they represent the point of view I have in terms of presenting it? I'm really looking to do research to make certain I know the topic well. The second phase is literally the setup, what takes place. I make certain I don't do my interview before the camera rolls. When I first started doing interviews for documentaries and stuff, I was always so nervous and so anxious. I'd want to make small talk, and I'd talk about what was at the top of my mind. And invariably, it was the interview, and I'd run that interview, and then camera would go on, and they go, well, yeah, we just talked about this. And audience members love ideation, that point of watching someone form ideas, of making connections. And if that connection happened 20 minutes before you rolled the camera, it's not going to be there. So I try to control it. And then the third part for me is how I listen and how I manage that interview. So it's really 3 pieces for me.
Are there any universal questions or universal ways of relating with someone that solicit great answers? Because I actually wrote an article about questions that always solicit great answers. Do you have any sort of tricks of the trade?
I don't know if I have tricks of the trade, but I always make certain that my questions are not yes or no questions. I always make certain my questions are observational. How did you feel about this? If you had this, or reflective, if you had to do this over again, how would you change it? So that the folks are not only reciting data or giving facts, they're really giving their interpretation. So rather than having set questions or set answers, which are fantastic, particularly in managing someone who's a little bit recalcitrant or trying to draw somebody out. Really what I'm looking to do is try to get them to be a little expansive. And that means asking them how something affected them. Describe how it, you're really asking them to describe something or to convey something, to express something. That also means sometimes, sidebar, everybody comes to an interview with some sort of agenda. Even if they appear to be reluctant, they're agreeing to be interviewed because they have a reason that they want to put forward. They want to share something, they're excited about something, they're trying to sell something. Whatever it is, they agree to it because they have an agenda. And they get really frustrated if you fail to give them an opportunity to talk about that agenda. So one of my favorite last questions are, so if you were doing this interview, what question would you be sure to ask? And often they'll go, no, I think you've covered it. I think you're in good shape. But sometimes they'll go, well, I think it's important X, Y, and Z. And you've given them an opportunity to present the content that they wanted to put forward. If you're editing it, you may or may not use it, but at least they've had an opportunity to participate in the way they wanted to.
And I will close with this. I've heard many journalists say the same exact thing. You have to ask them, what did I miss? Anyways, great point. Thanks so much for your time, Drew.
Oh, my pleasure. I always love talking with you, and I always love the work you're doing, so thanks for giving me a chance.
It's a good idea to plan questions even if you don't use them. During the interview, base questions on what the guest says. It's important to think of your interview as a conversation, not just a list of questions. Part of a good interview is the spontaneity that occurs between the guest and the host as the interview develops. But keep a list of questions as security. Maybe a list of questions on a clipboard or a small note card is acceptable even on television. Also, have a pen or pencil with you and take notes during the interview. If the person says something you want to follow up on, a few key words jotted down will remind you. In general, there are two basic types of questions, open-ended and close-ended. Close-ended questions end up with answers like yes and no. Try to avoid close-ended questions, which are questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no. They're things like, do you like your job? Did you see what happened? You're going to get a one-word answer. This type of question can result in a very stilted interview, but it can help initially to get the person talking. So a few closed-end questions may be asked early on in an interview. You can always follow up with the question, so would you please follow up? Asking questions that are easy and friendly is important at the beginning of the interview. Save difficult or controversial questions until the middle or the end of the interview. Be careful about asking questions that show bias or seems to seek a specific answer. This can be a leading question. For example, beginning a response with, "You don't think that," implies that the person is wrong in thinking a particular way. Other examples of leading questions, well, most people think that, "Don't you?" Or, "You'd vote against capital punishment, wouldn't you?" Try to avoid asking questions that show off your own knowledge. Sometimes playing dumb is a great way to get people to open up and explain their topic. Remember that the purpose is to get your guest talking. So what about stupid questions? So avoid inane questions with obvious answers like, "Were you glad you survived the crash?" No kidding. But it's okay to say, "So I know this is kind of a dumb question, but I have to ask." Don't feel compelled to jump in with a question if the guest stops talking or does not answer immediately. Although dead air is not generally acceptable in broadcasting, some different guidelines apply during an interview. If you jump in too fast, you may interrupt the guest's thought or not get a very good answer. Remember, sometimes people are nervous and they need time to warm up. Wait them out. Some pros say that waiting is one of the most effective tools. Developing questions for an interview is a skill that improves with practice. One tip is to know what you want to know. Do your research. Plan ahead of time what it is that you want to find out. Some good question starters are things like, why did you, or could you describe your experience, or how did you feel about? Those kinds of questions. You can stop this video and take a look at the list here. You want to dress for success, and a general rule of thumb to follow for dress is to be conservative. However, there's a lot of leeway in this guideline. For example, in radio, as you're not seen by the audience, dress may be more informal. Your style of dress may be related to whom you will interview. Politicians or business executives, well, be formal. Athletes in a locker room, you can be a little more informal. One of the most difficult aspects of an interview for beginners is retaining control of the interview. This does not mean talking or interrupting when the guest gives answers you don't like or don't expect. It does mean that you have to draw out people who are not too talkative and restrict people who talk too much. Interruption is a key skill to learn for the latter situation. Interrupting a guest is often the only way to maintain control of the interview. It's important with a guest who rambles on or is trying to focus the interview on his or her interest and not the interest of the audience. So how do you interrupt? Well, during a breath, when they take a breath, listen carefully to the guest's response, but then jump in just as they're breathing in. This will appear to be less rude. A non-verbal pat on the arm or leaning forward in your chair alerts a guest that you want to say something. And occasionally you're just going to have to jump in and firmly re-ask a question or remind the guest of the focus of the interview. For example, I understand your interest in this topic, but our audience wants to know. In extreme cases, you may have to talk right over the answer and become more aggressive, but always remain polite. Forgive me, but never give up the mic. One other reminder is to avoid letting the guest physically take control of the microphone. Interviews with politicians are an important part of the democratic process. Be fair and balanced. Your job is to present objective, impartial interviews with all political candidates and to provide the audience with balanced and fair information about the record of each person. But remember, politicians are media savvy. They always present a challenge to the interviewer because most of them are well rehearsed and smart about the interview process. And you may need to be a bit more aggressive with a politician than you would with other interviewees. And it's probable that the politician has an agenda that will not cooperate with you until he or she is given the chance to say what's important to him or her. Sports interviews can be a lot of fun, but also kind of frustrating. Often athletes are preoccupied before a game and are tired afterward. And many are inexperienced public speakers. Plus, there's noise and confusion in dugouts and locker rooms and at sports arenas, and they may make hearing a problem. You should assume that your audience is familiar with this sport and record of the athlete you're interviewing, so you don't need to provide a lot of background information. Here are some good do's and don'ts, a checklist to summarize some of the key points made today. You can stop this video and take a look. All right, remember, when you're done watching this lecture video, you're going to be taking a short quiz on the material that I just presented. This week, you're assigned to complete your second short podcast. Good timing, considering the topic of this lecture video. Now, you may record this directly into the Canvas Dropbox using the Record Media option. If you want to interview someone over the phone, put them on speakerphone, turn up the volume, and then hold the phone near your computer while you're recording directly into the Canvas Dropbox. I have instructions for you, both a video and a PDF on how to do this, how to record media directly into the Canvas Dropbox using the Record Media option. It's posted in an earlier module. Just go back and take a look. So with podcast number 2, I want you to up your game a bit. Still keep the running time within the limit, but be sure to script and open and close so you start and end smoothly. but also try to deliver that script in a conversational tone. Good luck. Well, that's the end of this lecture video. You will now continue working your way through this module. Now, don't forget, submit any questions to our class discussion board, or you can text me at 818-581-5432. You must complete all of the assignments that are due this week by the end of this week, Sunday, at 11:59.